Hello, and thank you all for joining us for our final session today in the Signal Innovation Showcase series. Allow me to introduce you to Corey Blankenship, Senior Security Engineer for GuidePoint Security. Corey?
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so we are at the end of the day, so I'm going to try and keep this to about 15 minutes as the happy hours I'm sure await. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about DevSecOps. Given the amount of time we have, it's going to be more broad strokes, but there's some key considerations around the DevSecOps methodology and how to roll it out and way we can measure our success around it. So first I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview around what DevSecOps is, where we can start, some initial steps. Next, I'll move into some key practices and tools that we can keep in mind when we're doing so. Second to last is culture and continuous improvement. And then lastly, metrics and monitoring so that we can measure our success going forward. So what is it? So traditionally, when you think about the deployments that we work on, whether or not it's applications or infrastructure, if you think about that from a left to right type of process, we build, we configure, and then we deploy. And in a lot of cases, we worry about security after the fact. So what we want to do with DevSecOps is move security to the beginning of that process, which is essentially what shift left is. So in that left to right process, by moving it to the beginning, we're shifting security to the left. Now, because security is everybody's concern anymore, it's not just the app dev team or the networking team, but everybody should be concerned with it. So what we're trying to do is share the responsibility share responsibility between the teams that should be concerned. So if you're spinning up infrastructure in the cloud, you should be thinking about infrastructure or security before you begin the process of building out those resources and deploying them. So when it comes to this methodology, though, a big question that comes up is, where do we start? It's a new process. We could be altering some workflows for the other teams. So if it's a new process to us, in my opinion, the best way to start is to start small and iterate from there. I'd like to think that if I was going to start this process, I would want to start with some kind of platform or some tools that I'm very familiar with, where I know how to kick off the process and I know what results to expect. In that way, let's say we are running security scans against source code that's been checked in on a new application. If that's a manual process, if we're going to automate that, make it a little bit easier, we know what tool we're going to be kicking off. We know what the results should be. So it makes it a lot easier for us to start with something we know what the results should be, and then if we run into any hiccups, it's a lot easier to troubleshoot when you know what you're working with. A big part of this is automation. Through automation, you can standardize and you can make what you're configuring or your scans or whatever tools you're kicking off a standard part of the process, standard part of workflows, and make that consistent. Consistency makes everybody's life easier, right? If you know what's going to happen, then you're not really concerned. It's not going to catch you off guard. But one thing to keep in mind, in my experience working with some app dev teams, security was considered something that slowed them down. They couldn't roll out their applications, or at least they didn't think they could roll out their applications as quickly as they wanted to because they had to keep security in mind. But what we want to try and do is find people on those teams. If we're trying to share responsibility between the teams that we're working with, it would be really helpful in fostering the DevSecOps methodology and rolling it out if we could identify someone on those teams who has an interest in security and can help foster the culture around that, can promote security within those teams, and help get buy-in across the teams that we're trying to work with. So some key practices and tools to keep in mind with DevSecOps. If we're going to be doing automation, a lot of times it's going to be storing infrastructure as code. It's a great way to keep track of what's been checked in, changes over time, but it's important that only those people that should have access to those configurations or to that application code should have access to it. You shouldn't have any prying eye who wants to review what you've done, the ability to do so. So you want to make sure that it's very siloed, and again, only those people that should have access do. In that way, we also want to think about secure secrets management. So in some of the applications I've worked with in the past, it wasn't necessarily uncommon to see configuration files with production databases containing proprietary information, their login credentials in plain text, and configuration files sitting in a source code repository. Now, that's probably not good if you're able to view proprietary information. Maybe it's chemical formulas or whatever you're storing. Probably not good for anybody to be able to get those credentials and view that information. So instead of haphazardly checking those things into source code, we should be storing those securely, providing access, again, to only those people who need those credentials when those credentials are needed, and that way we can protect that information and make the access to it a little bit more secure overall. Vulnerability management also becomes a very important topic. So, again, in my experience, there was a team that had an Oracle platform that they were using that was about 10 years out of date. Their priority wasn't around making sure that that system was patched and up to date. They had too many things on their plate to bring that into focus. It made that platform unstable. They were so many versions behind that they couldn't patch it, they couldn't upgrade it easily. They had to go probably 7 or 8 major releases ahead to get to the last supported version of it. So if we can take into account patch management or addressing vulnerabilities in security, again, maybe doing some automated scans against source code to check for any sort of vulnerabilities that exist, we can head these vulnerabilities off, head these gaping holes in our infrastructure or in our applications as quickly as possible. Now, again, kind of going back to that point I made where the application development team considered security to be something that was inhibiting their ability to deploy applications, we want to make sure that not only is DevSecOps something that people find value in, everybody's concerned about security, so we want to try and build a culture around it. Now, whether or not this comes in the form of conducting training sessions with these other teams that we're trying to bring to the table, or showing simply just the importance of what security is around their applications. If somebody's doing a pen test against an application, they can show you that, hey, your application is vulnerable to SQL injection. But the app dev team might not really be concerned about that. Oh, SQL injection, whatever. But if you show them, like, this is what could happen, this is why it's important, you begin to foster a culture of security. It helps with the rollout. It helps bring everybody on board. But in as much as we're talking about a shift in workflow, introducing new tools, automation, in as much as we expect application development teams to remediate vulnerabilities, improve their tools, improve their code over time, so should we in DevSecOps try and refine our processes as well. And if we're going to be working across all of these other teams and sharing responsibility, we want to make sure that we're getting feedback. If we're altering their workflow, and if it's something that isn't perceived as being helpful or valuable, certainly having that feedback to tell us, hey, this is where we need improvement. This is where your processes could be refined. Maybe you could make this a little bit easier or to be executed a bit more timely. The only way that we can refine our processes is having that feedback. But in rolling all of these things out, you want to know whether or not it's successful. So metrics, building reports around metrics, and monitoring for, let's say you're running scans again and looking for vulnerabilities. If we're thinking about how long it takes to remediate those vulnerabilities, or how many vulnerabilities we're finding over time, we can take metrics around that, we can build reports around that, we can determine whether or not these practices are, in the end, successful or otherwise. If we're, again, trying to refine what we're doing, that gives us an opportunity to do so. And this went a lot faster than I thought it would, but hey, again, happy hour awaits, so far be it for me to hang anybody back. But in the end, we're talking about simplification and standardization. We want to make security easier to implement, faster to implement. We want to make it a standard consideration whenever you're trying to do whatever deployment you're working on. Because it's simple, because it's easier, and because it's a standardized process, it's essential for ensuring that the other teams who are starting to incorporate these security tools and practices into their workflows, it allows them to continue their pace of development and deployment. It's not anything that's going to inhibit their workflow or affect it negatively. And overall, because it's a standard, it's going to help make everything a bit more stable. When it comes to identifying those security champions, when it comes to building that culture around security, that's going to help foster adoption by collaborating with these other teams, providing feedback, getting feedback. You're able to build that culture where security may have been met with resistance in the past. If you build that culture around security, then you have the opportunity to roll it out on a more broad scale. The long-term benefits of all of this, if that hasn't been just apparent throughout the short presentation I just gave, but the long-term benefits are many. If we are patching our systems faster, if we're running scans faster, going back to secure secrets management, if we are automating scans to look through source code for those plain text credentials, finding those early on, heading those off, the benefits there are huge. If we are thinking about security from the ground up when we're rolling out our systems, again, security at the forefront, the long-term benefits overall, fewer security holes. Now, as an example of this, when I said starting small, there was one project that I worked on a while back, and the load balancing and security platform that I specialize in for the most part, I spun it up manually onto a VM that was provisioned to me, and that was my process. Configure it manually, no big deal. I was tasked with deploying that in an automated fashion using Terraform into Azure. I hadn't done any of that. So instead of starting small and iterating from there, I kind of chucked myself into the deep end, and that ended up taking that project a lot longer than I would have liked to finalize. Now, when it comes to considering security from the beginning, though, one thing I noticed when I was building out this Terraform workflow, and I was using some templates that I found as a side point, if you can find things that are already built, if you're trying to implement something in an automated fashion, if those workflows exist already, use them where you can find them. So what I noticed in building out this Terraform workflow is that in Azure, it was provisioning public IPs for the admin console, which is bad. You don't want anybody in the world to be able to try and hammer your admin console and log in and then alter whatever security controls you have in place. So by seeing that early on, before I even hit the play button and rolled out this infrastructure that I was spinning up, I was able to head that off. So again, starting small and iterating, don't do what I did. But then again, learning all of that I had to learn to get that process deployed, I was able to take into consideration security at the forefront, head that off, and not worry about it later. So that concludes my presentation. Already have a question, so appreciate that. Where do you work? Where do you come from, sir? Oh, you don't say. I like your shirt.
Is this thing on? Ooh. So you mentioned that security tends to be kind of they felt like it's a hindrance to DevOps.
Yes.
And that's usually because they write something, they get it out there, it gets scanned, and then it gets sent back to them. Hey, fix this, and
Yes.
it's an iterative process, right?
Yep.
Have you ever seen that aha moment, and how do we get ahead and get in that aha moment where if we can move that process to the earlier parts of development, they won't get that, right? That's where their mindset starts. That it's a problem is that constant iterative back and forth
Yes.
after they've already done the development.
Yep.
How do we get that point across? What's the best way for them to have the aha moment that if we can move this over here, you won't have that iterative process. We'll get ahead of that. It'll be faster. It'll be easier for you, Mr. Developer, which is what we want to get to. How do we communicate that?
So I think that kind of goes to fostering that culture around security, right? So first of all, if you're looking at security as something that's going to be hindering your workflow and slowing you down, your concern isn't around security in and of itself. That's a thing that we now have to worry about. That's not going to make it important to another team. So by illustrating, if you're trying to communicate, for instance, a vulnerability that's found in an application, if you can show not only like, hey, here's this vulnerability you have to remediate, but if you can also show, and this is how it can be exploited, this is the potential long-term impact to that, I think having that knowledge gives that developer that, oh, so that is bad. We should address that. And when it comes to hindering their workflow, the best thing that I found is to try and, whatever security control you're trying to implement, again, if it's going to be like a WAF policy, right? So if you're deploying an application and the process is I'm going to check it in, and then whatever controls you have in place or whatever your CI/CD pipeline is, if that's going to move it right up into production. When you're implementing a WAF policy to protect that application, it could be that you've had a test version of that to build around the test traffic that they're throwing through their load balancing, right? Or load testing. So one thing that I found was pretty beneficial to aiding that process of getting a WAF policy in place was when they promote their code to production, moving that test WAF policy that we've built up to production as well. So they can deploy their application. They don't have to give us a call and say, hey, I'm deploying this. Can you put our WAF policy in place? And then there's that whole, Exactly, yeah. So if we're in lockstep with the development team, if we know when they're deploying their code, whether or not it's automated or otherwise, ideally it is, but if we're in lockstep with that development team, telling them about why this is important, helping them understand that, but also keeping pace with their workflow, it definitely gives a better perspective on what you're trying to do, and it makes it, from a cultural standpoint, a more acceptable approach. I hate to put it that way, but if security isn't something you're traditionally concerned about, then it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's not as hard as I thought it would be. It's not going to slow us down. So that would be my best thoughts on that. But yeah. I do like giving presentations where everybody's like, oh, hey, clarify that more. That means I did a really good job of covering everything, right? I think it's going to be unique to the teams. So it depends on what tools you have available.
The question was, is there a developed framework that can be used in federal for DevSecOps across all agencies, or will it be unique to each individual agency tailored, but using that framework?
I think it's going to be unique. So it depends on the manpower you have available, the tools that you have available, what type of infrastructure or applications you're developing. A framework could be specific to app dev or implementing physical infrastructure. So if that's not in your scope, then some of that doesn't apply. Now, in broad strokes, there could be a generalized framework you could adhere to, but by and large, I would say that it's going to be unique to the environment that you work in, especially if you're considering budgets or manpower or even just depth of experience on whatever you're trying to roll out. So. One minute. All right. Everybody has 1 minute. Get them in while you can. Otherwise, I'm going to be hanging out for a couple of hours, so if you want to stop by, say hello, or hammer me with a few questions, by all means, feel free to do so. But I definitely appreciate everybody giving me their time, and hopefully you found this beneficial. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hope everybody has a great night. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Well done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our next session will be tomorrow morning at 10:30, so please come back and see us again. Thank you.